Oh no, riff even more. So obviously, we're all kind of big users of Slack at ITV. We use it to manage instance. We use it for kind of cross-team collaboration, especially with all our teams kind of distributed around the country. We use it to kind of coordinate events. We use it to organise social events as well. That's the most important bit as well. But behind it is obviously a large company which is recently IPO'd, which very good. So yeah, V's now kind of got a proper while in all of her own. Yep. And so we're now joined here today by V. Brennan, who is the regional lead for service engineering.
That's right.
I got it. Very good.
You did.
And should we kind of explain how Slack kind of took themselves from an ops mentality into kind of a service ownership mentality? So please put your hands together for V.
Cool. Am I going to be able to switch that so you can just see my presentation and I can see mine?
Do you want the notes on?
I want my notes.
Yes. I think we come up.
Hang on a second. Don't go into Slack. God, it'll help us all.
Okay, so if we click on.
You go.
Turn off, get displays, like that, and then if we, that's what you want to present.
Yep.
So,
Isn't it not that one? I think that was it. That's yeah, that'll do it.
Okay. Then we've got that one, full screen that one.
Oh, good.
Just do it.
I do want to shout out to Rob for having a Slack bot in his presentation. I was actually quite happy to see that. It's like, woohoo!
No, sorry, I'm not very good at AV.
Eh?
There's no F key.
There's no F function keys.
Oh, there you go. So, there you go. I think we're there. It's got the bar at the top, lovely.
That's cool. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's lovely to be here. So, like Tom said, I'm going to talk to you about our transformation from a very heavy ops kind of culture to a service ownership culture. And rather than just telling you about like the theoretical and the academic approach that we took, I'm going to pepper this with some real life stories of our highs and lows, because it certainly hasn't all been smooth sailing. So to start a little bit about me, I lead the regional service engineering team for EMEA out of Dublin. I started out my agile journey actually at the Bank of New Zealand in Wellington in New Zealand back in 2010, and at that time I was working for B&Z Digital, and our leader there basically locked the door and created a startup inside a 150-year-old bank. So it was very, very cool. We invested a lot of time and energy in agile training and coaching at the time. There was a lot of experimentation, so I learned a lot in a very, very short time. Got a lot of exposure to different types of agile frameworks, test-driven development, lean, DevOps, all of the buzzwords. And from there, I got an opportunity to go and work at Spotify in Stockholm. And for me, that was like going to church, going to agile church to be dipped in the holy water. And it was crazy because when I got there, it wasn't half as agile as this 150-year-old bank I had been working in. So that was a bit of a mind spin at the time. But that was more about the fact that agile was actually part of Spotify's DNA, and it wasn't actually as visible every day, right? So it's not like you're having all of the rituals every day. It's just that it actually becomes core of how you actually operate. And then I got the opportunity to move to Slack in Dublin to get back closer to my family after being living away for 18 years. And the tech scene in Dublin had really, really changed when I got back. Facebook, LinkedIn, all those folks some of them hadn't existed, never mind had a presence in Dublin when I left. So it's actually really nice to be back in part of that community and see how Dublin has changed. I've led teams on the dev side, on the ops side, and even in IT. I'm a big proponent of DevOps, having worked on both sides. I do believe that together we build better software. It brings together two very different disciplines and necessary skill sets. So I think we actually achieve a lot more together. On the rare occasion, I've probably met 2 to 3 people who actually are devs and ops in one single person, and they are some of my most favorite people to work with ever. But there's not very many people out there who are naturally that. So it's bringing all the folks together is something I love. This is a quote from Charity Majors, and this sort of sums up working in ops. My last 2 jobs were in very well-known, or including this one, very well-known hyper-growth organizations, and on the ops side of the house. So they're very, very fast-paced environments. There's very, very high stakes. I was at both of these companies as they were preparing to IPO, and everybody kind of loses their mind a little bit before the IPO. Especially the leadership, because they're supposed to be the steadying factor, but they're all too personally invested, so they go a bit mad. So it's a really kind of crazy place to be. But it gives you the opportunity for some real extreme learning, right? And fast track your learning. Failure is absolutely inevitable. Everything breaks, and it will. And crisis becomes a real learning opportunity in organizations like this. You need a lot of resilience in your systems, but also resilience in yourself. You learn a lot about how to cope in these environments, and it either becomes something that you will run away from or something that you embrace and actually really, really enjoy. I'm still here, so that says a lot. So a bit about Slack. You've all heard of Slack. You all use Slack. I mean, it's had meteoric growth, right? A lot of that was publicized just before the IPO. We've actually hit, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, Des. We've hit like 10 million.
10 is the publicly available stat.
Okay, so 10 million is the new figure, and about half of them are actually outside the US. So from a user's, revenue, servers, employees perspective, it's just been meteoric growth right across. And these are really, really awesome kinds of problems to have, but they definitely give you problems. We've doubled in size every 6 months, and it's created major inflection points in our architecture, right? So we have had to stop and remodel and redesign Slack multiple times, and it's kind of become a bit of a hallmark of how we operate. So we're constantly chasing tech debt, new features, and remodeling the system, so it just creates this constant flux and swirl. One of the really interesting stories is that every time we've stopped and re-architected, we have grossly underestimated what we needed every time. So when we first designed Slack, we said that no channel would ever have more than 100 users. Like ever? Like that's just crazy. We said that no organization would ever be bigger than 1,000 people. And we were like, yeah, totally wrong. So we keep hitting these thresholds. Currently, our largest customer is 130,000 people. One person posting to their general channel broke their Slack because they posted a single message to every single person in the company. I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you this either, but I will. That customer sits on a single shard that runs really, really hot, right? It started out as a really good idea when it was like, 10,000 people sitting on that shard, and now it's 130,000. It has its own Slack channel, the shard, not the customer. That shard has its own Slack channel, and we all basically pile in there on a regular basis and go, oh, what's happening on 524? And it's pretty intense. So that's one of the big problems that we're actually working on right now. And we're using a newer technology called Vitesse to put in front of our legacy shards to actually give us some vertical scaling in there. So Slack has grown from 10 to 14,500 servers globally. We're in 16 regions around the world. and all of that in 5 years. And we're an AWS shop. We were dabbling with GCP for a while, but we've actually shut it down. And we're all in on AWS right now, at least. So the more and more servers you get and the more global expansion you have, obviously it just gets more and more complex, more distributed. So tooling is required at this point, right, to just survive. And we definitely treat our servers as cattle, especially in the public cloud. There is, as you all know, there's nothing magical about the cloud. It's just someone else's computer. And basically, we need to have reliable automation in place so we can actually just replace these servers whenever we need to, right? And we're always fighting failover, security concerns, and just drift in the system in general. Obviously, a lot happens in the cloud after we've provisioned a machine, like auto-scaling and failovers and stuff. That's been something that we've actually spent quite a bit of time and energy on. We had this time last year, my team answered maybe 2 to 3 pages every other day because Amazon was having some issue or other in a data center. And the reality is that when you have that many machines, you will have issues, right? It's not that Amazon service is crummy. It's just that when you're talking about millions of servers and pieces of hardware, you're going to have problems. And our excuse we used to tell customer experience team to go back and tell the customer, we're sorry, Amazon is having an issue, right? And we got to a point where we were like, right, this is probably not cool. We actually need to build some failovers into the system so that it can actually respond to that, because this is a natural phenomenon that will just occur. So we invented a new piece of software called Flailover. It's for our flannel systems, and basically what it does is it detects any issues in the data center, picks up the traffic and moves it. And about 2 months ago, someone severed a power cable in the Frankfurt data center and it lost 25% of its power. Before we even could respond to the page and look at a graph, Flailover had picked up all of those customers, moved them to London and Dublin. Nobody noticed a thing, and everything was just working. And my team and I all went out for a beer. That would have been something that in the past would have caused us all to run around with our hair on fire. It would have been an absolute disaster. So, investing in this kind of automation at that scale is something that you really, really need to do. But centralized ops didn't work for us, right? So it's one of those things that works great on while it lasts. We noticed way too late. We had created a lot of superheroes. We were burning out quite a few people. The operators and systems engineers were, feeling like they were just on this machine going round and round. Just, I just pressed the button to make the machine go bing. They were just like, it was really, really crazy. In Dublin, we had a single employee on his own in the team who was responsible for keeping Slack up in EMEA. And EMEA is actually right in this time zone, is actually Slack's busiest time. So right now, all of Europe is online. The east coast of the States has just woken up, and all my colleagues in San Francisco are still asleep. So our team handle any outage that is related to load on the system, and we were having a lot of them. And there was this one dude who was doing that all on his own. So there was an overall recognition that we couldn't keep doing this, that this just wasn't the right way to do things, and that we needed to change something. What we had created was responsibility as a service. So development teams were just building stuff and then saying, hey, you look after it. And we were like, what? Things were just thrown over the wall in our direction. It's not done out of any sort of mean intent. It was done from the perspective of these very expensive software engineers need to focus their time building features. They need to focus their energy on innovation. Let's outsource the ops to someone else. But what we had actually inadvertently done was reduce the response time for issues, because ops people didn't have all the context. We no longer knew how all of the system worked. And the software developers also were unhappy because their customers were unhappy and the features weren't working as they'd expected. So we knew that we had to pivot and we had to do something different. We had become the Night's Watch or janitors, and something needed to change quite radically. So we basically created an organizational structure within service engineering, or we literally changed our name from ops to service engineering, to promote tools and platform development, to drive effective service ownership out to teams. So the first step was actually us making this change internally so we could actually support the change externally. And we weren't even really talking about it externally yet at all. We were actually just really in a preparation mode of saying, if we were going to do this, what would it look like? What would people need from us? We needed to sell the change and actually offer people some solutions and like, here's how you do it, and here's how we'd make it really easy. So that was what we did. And the goal was to get back to DevOps. And the irony is that many of the people who work at Slack used to work at Flickr, because the founders founded Flickr as well. And the folks at Flickr, some of those, Paul Hammond and John Alspaugh, were people who had coined the phrase DevOps, and they were working in Slack at this time. And it was like, how have we drifted so far? So there was an overall kind of recognition that we had drifted too far. And the nice thing was it was kind of still part of our DNA, so there wasn't a huge amount of resistance to getting back there. And this is charity majors again. The world has moved past operators, right? Software needs owners. And we're all writing software, right? The people who work for me in service engineering spend a lot of their time writing software. We don't just write, we don't just press the button and make the machine go big. So our director made an announcement, and it basically started there. And he's laying down the seed for the change that we want to spread. So what he's starting to do, he's starting to pilot this newsletter. But the themes that are in this newsletter are around capacity planning and cost saving, right? It was a focus on our AWS spend because it was just accelerating out of control. Talking to people about on-call, so people actually knew what was happening with on-call and giving them a bit more visibility into how that actually works and what's going on in there. Sharing with people metrics, starting to introduce the concept of service level objectives, dashboarding, and giving people an insight into what they could be doing. So that was kind of the beginning. So we had to change our mission to get out of this silo. And we thought the Google SRE model could be good. We also considered what the organization would need from us. And we really changed. I think the key thing is we changed from being at their service to offering them a service or providing a service, right? That the dynamic really, really changed. So it's all about providing tools and platforms to people to enable service ownership. So this is how we approached it and the values that we hold dear. It's about automation, right? I've already talked about how at this scale, automation is just your life's blood. You can't survive without it. Shared version control across the org. One step build and deploy, so anybody can actually deploy anywhere. Using feature flags more maturely, setting metrics, and having IRC and IM robots actually embedded in Slack to do things for us, to actually automate away tasks and get them to actually help us do things. And then the values that we brought to that was a genuine respect right across the board, right? For DevOps, there is no hierarchy. We cannot exist without each other. We need each other. We build better shit together. So a mutual respect was really important. Defaulting towards trust amongst people, right? You don't have to earn our trust. We give you our trust. And that links to our blameless postmortem kind of philosophy also. Like when we write postmortem documents, nobody's names are ever really mentioned in those documents. It's all about a spirit of learning. and having a healthy attitude to failure, right? So one of the best quotes I've heard about incidents and postmortems is, a postmortem is the way to maximize the investment that the company has already made in that incident, right? You've already lost a ton of money, so why not make sure you get some return on that investment? Service ownership. So teams who create software are responsible for managing it and monitoring it. And they do that through SLOs, or service level objectives. We're measuring the speed of response, so MTTR is mean time to respond. We're interested in capacity and performance monitoring, right? So is the next feature going to throw your service over the wall, or like, are you actually watching these things? And incident response and post-mortem activity, and having strong process for all of those things. These skills did not exist in the company, though. That was part of the problem, right? Like, a lot of the skills existed very, very much in the old ops team, but in the development teams, we had been drifting away from the DevOps model for so long that skill just did not exist. Also, the whole idea of SLOs and metrics, there's key parts of the system that have no monitoring whatsoever. So I was the incident commander for an outage with Slack calls, and at the end of the incident commander is supposed to write up a technical summary which describes what actually happened with the incident, how long it lasted, how many customers were impacted, and the type of experience that customers would have had at the time. And I couldn't get any information because we had no telemetry in the system for calls at all. So that became their number one post-mortem activity, right? So now they have metrics, but that was not uncommon across Slack, right? Like, Slack is 5 years old. It's like a giant baby. It has just ballooned and grown really, really fast, but it lacked a lot of maturity and a lot of structure. Assuming this ownership isn't free, it actually costs you, right? We're not just shifting the work from the ops team into devs and saying, good on you, and walking away. There's a big emphasis on preparation and support. The goal is for us to reduce the burden, but still empower people through visibility and telemetry into their systems. So the incident response works better when you've got people who have the context for these services or features and know how they actually work. When you have service engineering folks who actually know how the infrastructure hangs together. And providing our dev teams tooling and abstractions to insulate them from all of the complexity associated with all of that infrastructure stuff, right? I'm currently working on a project with a team around international data residency. We're building out a new European data residence in Frankfurt, and we're working with the search team in New York. And the search team don't know how to set up new infrastructure because they've never done that before. They just run search from the back end up, not from the infrastructure down. So they don't know how to use Terraform, they don't know how to use Chef. So we're leveraging the SRE model. I sent my team to New York to sit with them for 2 weeks to build our infrastructure, but also to teach them how it works. So that was really, really important. The other thing we really, really want to do is make the developer experience efficient and joyful. Make it nice to be able to set up new features and new services. And when it's done right, it's awesome. And we will do that through good tools. That's our belief. So we're making a huge investment in developer tooling. But it isn't easy. The software gets really, really complex. There's more and more change. The tenure of people in the teams is going down. Like, this is a company that's doubled in size, sometimes 6 months on 6 months. We're about, I think, 600 people in the engineering organization now, and probably 70% of them are less than a year. Like, it's bonkers. We talk about Slack years. Like, if you've been there a year, that's 7 years anywhere else, because it's like, especially when you're in a 5-year-old company, right? Like, you actually have been around for 20% of the life of this company. That gets you somewhere at Slack. That's good. But it means that the system is just getting more and more and more complex every single time, right? It's more distributed, it's more global. And things have a limited lifespan. Technologies that we're using now will be redundant in a year, in 2 years. And trying to actually build for that is a real challenge. So we need to get good at learning new stuff and being able to re-architect stuff. If you're not in front of it, the result, it's overwhelming, right? If you're not in front of all of this change. And the challenge is that these centralized teams, they don't have context. Diagnosing issues is very, very hard. Parts of the system are orphaned. I'm on call for a bunch of orphaned systems and I don't even know what they are. And the only reason I'm on call for them is like the eng managers end up being on call for this list. And I got paged for one 2 weeks ago. I was like, I don't even know what it is. I don't know what it does. And of course, you look it up in our Omni catalog of services, because it's orphaned. It doesn't have anything in there. It just says orphaned and escalate to eng managers. I'm like, yeah. So we have that sort of stuff happening right now. We're down to the last kind of 5 of those, right? If you think like maybe we have 50 or 60 services inside Slack actually operating, we're down to the very, very last ones. And it's one of those things, this system hasn't been touched in 3 years. The dude who wrote it left, like nobody knows anything about it. So that's where we're at with them. Things break more often. Things are brittle. Things don't get fixed. They just get parked because we're working on this feature. So as the system actually increases, you need platforms to prevent fatal complexities in the system. My team look after service discovery at Slack. So this is, we use Console for that. It basically sits at the center of all services at Slack. And anybody who's launching a new service and wants to use service discovery have to register on our service. We have a thing called the default cluster. And as you can imagine, default, it's a dumpster fire of random services that are in there. And it's really, really complex. And anybody who wants to set up a new service, they find it really, really intimidating. They don't know how to use this thing. So they just shove it in default. And some of our most critical services are in there, like real-time services in our job queue. We managed to get job queue out, but real-time services is still in there. The way Console is designed, we can't rename that cluster because it gets hard-coded into the configuration all over the system. So we want to actually just get rid of it, but all new services need to actually have something to register to, so the concept of still having some sort of default exists. But this is all way, 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 way too complex for people who are setting up new services. So our goal is to actually create a client wrapper over the top of that, where using something like Envoy, where they can actually just easily set up a new service and they don't need to know what cluster it is in. Under the hood, we will figure out where it should go. We'll also rate limit you if you're a really greedy service, and manage you that way, right? So these are some of the things that we're thinking about, but we're not there yet. Software is changing so fast, and I talked about needing platforms, but we also need the education, right? Developer productivity is an exploding field, and we need to actually honor and recognize developer productivity as something to be protected. We need to ensure we have a balance. Their job is to actually innovate and create a really, really cool product that our customers love, so we should actually try and maximize the amount of time we give them to do that, and be respectful of that. And it's also about acknowledging the platforms do make our lives easier, but that's not why they're there. They're actually there to make the developers' lives easier and our users' lives easier. So, speaking of platforms, we embed a huge amount of tools directly into Slack to actually help us do these things. So this is a snapshot from our deploy channel. I go there every day because the Giphy game is very high in this channel. It's really good fun. Giphies they're totally a thing. So it's really good for team coordination. There's a lot of transparency. The deploy wizard will automatically pick up everything in the deploy and it reports back. This is new. We used to go from dog food to prod 100% YOLO. Last year, like this isn't even like recently, last year, most of our incidents were self-inflicted pokes in the eye. Like now what we have is percentage-based rollouts, which are pretty obvious. We also have tier-based rollouts, so depending on what tier of Slack you're on, we might roll a change only to dog food, or dog food is our own version of Slack, obviously. We could roll it just to free. We could roll it just to enterprise customers. We can roll it just to a single customer. So we use feature flags for all of those sorts of things. We speak in Reacti to each other. You can't yeah, you can, well, someone's just gone, ta-da. But we do speak in Reacti to each other, and there's an interesting story around that our new senior VP of engineering, you can guess by his title that he's probably a little bit old. He was like, Reactis, what's all this Reacti stuff? And then he went, oh my God, Reactis are amazing, because instead of having to go through 100 emails every day, I go through my Slack and I go, thumbs up, tick, eyes, thumbs up, thank you. That's it. And he's done 6 emails just like that, right? And we actually communicate with each other that way. We don't use email internally. Nobody uses email at Slack, which is why I'm terrible at responding to your emails. Because like, oh shit, I better check email one day this week.
It's like voicemail.
Yeah, right, who uses that, right? Voicemail. I don't even remember the last time I got a voicemail. But, you know, it actually genuinely does build in efficiency, but also it creates this kind of joy, bounciness, which is weird. Everybody at Slack is very, very happy, and I was very suspicious of that when I first joined Slack, but you get sucked in and assimilated. This is an example of just collaboration. This is from the incident meeting. So every week we have an incident meeting. So we were running incidents before. We were having postmortems before, but we didn't, nobody did their postmortem actions because they were too busy doing features. Now you have to go to a meeting with the senior VP of engineering and actually talk about the incidents you had last week and what your team are doing about them. So funny enough, people are doing their post-mortem actions, which is really, really nice. So we pin these kind of things to channel. It helps us track things. We've got the Jira integration that we use a lot, and that basically will have a permalink with an unfurl of the actual ticket in the message. You don't need to even link the Jira ticket number. You can just type DRE2750, it knows that that's a Jira ticket and it will put it in for you. It's so nice. The integrations mean we don't have to leave Slack. They make your life simpler. They drive behaviors in the team. So we have like a stand-up bot every day at 10 o'clock that says, post your stand-up. They streamline process. And it goes beyond dev teams too. I mean, I know I'm here to talk about DevOps, but any team can check in and update their OKRs. I can approve an expense claim. I can put in a leave request, all integrated into our HR systems and our finance systems. I can work in Slack and never have to log into anything else and leave. It's nice. And we use a new feature called Block Kit to build a lot of these. So some of them we do with webhooks, but like the new Block Kit feature is super awesome. It makes it really easy for people to actually build new bots and new integrations. Obviously, I talked about monitoring and having telemetry and visibility of your system and what is actually going on. So notifications are a big thing. We have integrations with all of the notifications. Every team has a different set of notifications. And a lot of these also will have their alert link directly into PagerDuty and page people if necessary. So we've got like some examples of the AWS Provisioner, Thousand Eyes, the deploy bot, Sieve. And this feedback is useful for ownership, right? So yeah, it's chat ops, but it's also really good notification hygiene. We tune it to get signal for servers or databases. All of those alerts go to special designated alerts channels. So we have alerts console, and I get a notification. Well, it lights up. I don't get a notification whenever there's something in there. I also get a weekly run up of my SLO in there as well every Monday for the last 7 days. That's really useful. I take a look at that, and where we've been failing, I go and dig in to the graphs in Grafana and figure out what the hell was happening on any given day. And it just makes sure that we know what is happening with our system and how the system is being used. There's endless options of integrations, so look into them, consider them. Visualization, I think I've touched on this already, is one of the most important things that we have. This is called What Happened, and it's a dashboard that we created that if there's an outage, you can go here and basically have a look from code deploys or chef runs, and we can basically dive into this data and find out what's actually happening. Global failures are very rare for us. They're usually regional kind of issues. This is the global health overview dashboard. We had an old one which was called Is Slack Up? But you needed a master's in metrics to be able to read the thing. So the goal of this dashboard is that anybody, anywhere in the whole organization can look at this dashboard and know the status of Slack at any given time. That's the goal. How much time have we got?
15 minutes.
Oh, awesome. Good. I was like, oh my God, I'm way behind. So I'd like to just look at one of the teams in service engineering, the newest team that we have, and give you a bit of insight into what their focus is, our SRE team. So I mentioned already, very much based on the Google kind of model. It's very new and impactful. The role is really to increase awareness, improve resilience of software. There's a lot of cloud networking anomalies that dev teams are not really aware of, and they don't really know how to build their service to be able to deal with them. And that recent stuff we did with Flailover is a really good example. We want teams thinking about so if we do lose connectivity and then regain it, how do they prevent a thundering herd? How do they actually set up their service to be able to respond and be resilient? The automation that we have in place now is more nines than we get from AWS. That's cool. So the mission is really to improve awareness. So they're embedded in different teams, and I think your own team is very, very similar. It's about a shared platform. It's about introducing on-call and teaching people how to do that. And they're really the front line of service ownership. So they're not about coming in and saying, these are the 70 practices and code practices you must follow to be a good employee. They're focused on a very, very small number of things, right? It's about looking at SLOs, setting up the pager rotations, and having teams create them themselves, having regular capacity and performance reviews of the services that they own, and then assessing the deployment risk of their service. That's it. So when we went and talked to developers and managers about it, they were like, okay, this actually doesn't sound that hard. This actually sounds good. And we're also trying to focus on things that do matter to these teams anyway, right? Like, it's not like we're trying to get them to care about performance. They already do, but we're actually trying to enable them to be better at it. They really feel it when they're not there. I already mentioned like the search team in New York, right? Like that when they don't actually have access to this kind of resource in their team, they really, really do struggle. So it's one of the fastest growing teams that we have, and trying to scale it out is actually really quite hard, because even if you've worked at Google as an SRE for years and you know how that whole thing works, coming in and learning how Slack works and then hitting the ground running and supporting a team is actually a pretty big ask. So that's a really big challenge for us. Safety engineering. So We introduced the safety engineering last year in 2018 after we had a major outage. Basically, it was like, something's got to give. So their mission is to ensure that we respond efficiently and effectively to incidents, and we're actually treating them as learning opportunities. So we have a / command within Slack called assemble. Anybody can do assemble. And if you assemble, you will immediately get a response from a incident commander from the major incident command rotation, and you will get an incident coach from our customer experience team, and we will arrive and we'll say, what's up, Tom? What are you seeing? You will tell us what the problem is. As the incident commander, I'll assess this situation. We will discuss the severity of that situation. We might do some preliminary looking in the system, looking at graphs. I'll decide what team needs to be paged, and I will go get help. And then that person, a responder, will come and work the incident for us, but I will stay there. If it's a SEV1 or SEV2, I will stay in that incident and actually run the incident process. Because we've realized that actually trying to do the communication liaison and fix the problem and dig into the graphs all at the same time is just too much. So the incident commander, we also had lots of people with lots of ideas, and nobody could come to a consensus, and right, like it became like, oh well, the most senior person in the incident got to say. So how we run our incidents is the incident commander has final authority. And will tell you what to do. They generally reach out to people for consensus, but they're like, okay, Tom, go do that. So it can be simple, but it needs to be organized. We've invested a huge amount in training. We have incident lunches. We have learning, we're trying to create this whole learning org. We have post-mortem reading groups. We have the post-mortem process itself. And it's more than just the postmortems and action items, right? Like it's actually trying to build a muscle in the organization. And we need to loop back and see how people are learning and how they are responding to these things. So we have a very standardized process with very, very clear roles and responsibilities. We have a severity matrix for assessing severity. We do still have discussion about that, right? Like especially in the SEV2, SEV3 range, right? SEV1s are always pretty obvious. But SEV2 and SEV3, it's like, is this a SEV2? Will I actually wake someone up in San Francisco for this, which is what I would do for a SEV2, or will I wait until office hours San Francisco time, which is a SEV3? So there's often a lot of discussion in there. What we have tried to create is an environment where you default to waking someone up. Doesn't sound great, but it actually gets people to fix their systems more if you wake them up in the middle of the night. We don't actually do it that often, right? But while we've been setting this up, it's actually been quite a challenge. There was a major shift, and we got all development teams to set up PagerDuty rotations, and they were due to start from Monday. And on Friday, we had a major SEV1 outage. And I paged folks who obviously weren't on call yet, and nobody came. So I paged another team, and nobody came. So I manually paged 25 different people in the hope that someone would come. And I went, and the next morning when they all realized they missed a page, they were a bit infuriated because they were like, well, I wasn't even on call. And I went along to their post-mortem, and I actually said to them, I was Jon Snow standing on the wall, and I sent a crow in every direction to try and get someone to come to help. That was the intention of what I did. And they were like, oh, okay. Because the reality is in the SEV1, we have a full-on assemble page, which actually just pages almost every single engineer in the company. So we're still tweaking it. The development side of the organization, the product side, are still getting used to being on call and responding. I had another one last week where 10 people didn't respond. We got there eventually. And these are different teams every time, right? So we're like kind of slowly moving through the organization. We run a thing internally called Disasterpiece Theatre. We're big fans of chaos engineering. the idea is you start simple, it's organized via Slack, and we learn a lot from these things, and it's a constant program. Last quarter, we actually did a full AZ failure Disasterpiece Theatre, and it involved like all of our T0 systems, and it was actually really terrifying and fun. Yeah, and we learned a lot. So a little bit of a look into Slack's future. So lots of developers don't actually want to do that computing side. I was just having a conversation with someone last week in San Francisco who is an iOS developer, and they were like, I don't even know what the terminal looks like, you know, like the command line, what do you mean? And there's kind of good reason for that, right? Like we've got now generations of people who've actually been separated away from the nitty-gritty of computers, and they've never seen a data center, right? Like you've probably never seen a data center. But the real problem is this, right? Like these are the options that you have. And it's a nightmare. And it's actually really difficult to be good at all of these things, or even a slice of these things. We use many of these icons, and we laugh that it's a bit like a Where's Waldo, trying to figure out, you know, what you use. We're big users of Vitesse, Console, Prometheus, but even with those, we still roll our own stuff, right? Also, and the loop just continues, and it just gets into this kind of terrifying spiral of complexity. So I totally appreciate why people on the product side of the house don't actually want to get into the bells of the computer. So we need to simplify things for developers, and there's two main areas that we're focusing on, self-service and observability, right? So we want to combine homegrown software and cloud to give people containers, service mesh, orchestration, so that they don't actually have to get into the complexity of configuration and Chef and Terraform and all of those types of things, or console even for that matter. Actually creating a way for them easily to build services and also easily to do the right thing, right? So putting guardrails in the system so that they can't roll out terrifying config changes right across the whole fleet and take you down. And observability is the other side of that, right? So actually letting people have very, very strong monitoring and visibility into their system at any given time, and so that they can actually even predict, right, about that whole capacity and performance planning piece as well. So one of the things that we talk about is we don't really care about how many nines you have. It's about the user experience, right? Every single user should count. And we need special tooling to provide that kind of visibility, not just aggregated numbers, right? Because we've been guilty ourselves of talking in nines, right? We're like, oh, we're fine, we're 4 nines, it's fine. It's like, yeah, but one of the instances, I don't know if you remember, Des, one of the instances was all of Europe was out. But it was like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It was only, 15% of the user base at the time. And we were like, it was a whole continent. And we were in it. So we cared. This kind of idea of aggregated numbers that extract away from the user experience is really crappy. And we want to be able to give people insights into what's going on. Slack builds Slack with Slack. Our future will be driven by Slack, using Slack. We have it in our DNA. I already mentioned, like, the Flickr folks are still a core part of Slack. So we still have all that history there, and we still want to build on it. So what we want to do is build more and more integrations into the product as we go forward. More bots, more integrations, more apps, make service ownership enjoyable for people, find opportunities to export what we learn as part of the product and actually build it in. We need to keep our focus on the original goal to make sure we get there. And it's framed around ownership, right? Like back to that service ownership at the heart of it. DevOps, when it fails, is basically just like, nah, you do it because it's actually kind of crap. That's not what we want. We will really want to help developers who start out feeling like shit scared to, yes, I'm nailing it. I'm building really awesome software that's super resilient, super performant, and my customers love it. That's where we want to bring our developers to. And we think that together we can actually do that. And that's it. That was long.